couple days ago on stream, I was asked the question, if I could make my own Call of Duty, what would the story be and when would it take place? And well, I took the question a little bit too seriously. So I wrote my own Call of Duty game, talked about the characters inside it, and as well as kind of gave a general idea how it could fit either into the entirety of the Call of Duty timeline or take a little bit of a shift moving forward. I don't know if you guys will like this type of video. I kind of did one like this before with Call of Duty Ghosts 2, where I wrote that game, which would be next in its series. But yeah, this one's kind of completely different. I did use some AI to create some images and videos to go along with the story because, well, the game doesn't exist and I can't just create things out of nothing. So just to be transparent, that is there as well. But yeah, this is kind of the story behind the game that I would call Call of Duty Aftermath. The one thing that I think is incredibly overlooked with the game of Call of Duty Ghosts is that its setting is actually a little bit post-apocalyptic. You see, in this game, Odin strikes have hit the earth, and because of it, there are many areas around the world that have become completely abandoned, ghost town, things along those lines. And that's one thing about the setting of Call of Duty Ghosts that I think is incredibly underrated. So that is going to be kind of what we steal moving forward. But also, if we take a closer look at the entirety of the timeline for every Call of Duty within the cinematic universe, it is pretty full. In fact, there's pretty much every single decade except for the early 2000s, there's been a Call of Duty game that takes place there. So in other words, to make a game that's post-apocalyptic, we have to make a divergence. Now this divergence we are going to make happen right around the year 2030, but specifically right after the events of the next Modern Warfare game, Modern Warfare 4. So it'll kind of take place in an alternate reality after the events of Modern Warfare 4. And what will happen is at the very end of the game, Makarov will actually win, and we will zoom out and see that around the world, nukes have been fired, and it is now a nuclear winter. And this will essentially be a post-credit scene at the end of Modern Warfare 4, so you won't know what has happened to any of the soldiers, and that is where Call of Duty Aftermath will pick up, right as the nukes are going off. So the game will begin slightly before the nukes are launched. We will see some soldiers in battle, and all of a sudden you will see a missile trail overhead. Soldiers start to scramble. They start to scramble for the nearby nuclear bunkers. They all try to escape inside, and various groups of soldiers around the world. In fact, there will be a segment that you play very similar to one of the very first missions in Call of Duty Ghosts when the Odin strikes are going off, where soldiers are in battle and all of a sudden completely start to scramble, and you are tasked with sprinting to the most by nuclear bunker, safe zone, things like that. And this will happen in various different areas around the world with various different groups of soldiers, each gameplay scene cutting between the different areas around the world. Some of the soldiers you will recognize. You will see characters like Captain Price and Ghost inside of New York actually go and scramble inside of a bunker. But other soldiers, like for example the Los Vaqueros in Mexico, won't be so lucky. The nukes will go off there before any of them are anywhere near one of these nuclear bunkers. So basically we will see around the world complete and utter destruction. Hence the name Call of Duty Aftermath. It is after the nukes have dropped. This will then cut to a scene that shows 1 year later. It will immediately pick up inside one of these bunkers following the events of, once again, Captain Price and Ghost inside said bunker. The only thing that I can really compare this to is something along the lines of Fallout 3 when you wake up inside the bunker. It's been years later, but this time a radio signal has gone off that Ghost and Price have now picked up on, and it seems as though this is a radio signal directly for them from one person and one person alone, and that is POTUS. At this time, essentially we find out that Olympus has fallen, the White House has fallen, and they are stuck within a bunker underneath the White House. So they then essentially need to escape outside of the bunker and work their way through New York to try to find some sort of transport vehicle to get to Washington. As they go through New York in various different areas, they see the rubble, they see the destruction, but one thing they realized is not everyone was killed. There is still a military presence outside outside of said bunkers, and they need to fight their way and find a vehicle to get themselves to Washington. So the heroes go over to JFK Airport to see if there's any sort of vehicle that they can find, and lo and behold, the airport is completely and utterly destroyed. But what's weird is they see a further soldier presence, and when they get there, they have a helicopter, but these aren't American soldiers, they are from Russia. So we end up taking out these soldiers and working on repairing the helicopter before taking it to Washington. Now, when they eventually get to Washington, they have to fight their way through a rubbled up White House. Once again, Russian soldiers being there, but eventually they make their way into the bunker underneath the White House. When they end up getting to, I guess you could say, the presidential suite or presidential room, no one is there. No one can be found. No one who potentially sent that radio signal. However, there is one thing, and that is a red phone that immediately starts to ring. And when it is picked up, on the other side, there is a voice saying, "You must find us,
because the only day was yesterday."
They get this riddle, but what they do realize is that slogan is for SEAL Team 6. The only day was yesterday, which their main base is located in Virginia, which is actually quite nearby. However, unfortunately, upon exiting White House and exiting the bunker, they find that not the Russians, but rather scavengers, a faction that you wouldn't normally have to deal with in a Call of Duty game. But again, because this is post-apocalyptic, scavengers are completely destroying the helicopter and taking it for parts. Unfortunately, they were able to find a vehicle, but they have about a 3 to 4 hour road trip all the way to Virginia, which throughout this time, they get into several different firefights and various different missions that take place on the road on the way there. And specifically, this gives the campaign various different pieces of scenery in this world that's completely different than anything we've seen before in any other Call of Duty game. Now, upon getting to Virginia, and specifically to the Navy SEALs headquarters, we end up seeing that the headquarters is being completely and utterly attacked, and we have to kind of join in and help them out before we find out who sent us the message. And that is none other than SEAL Team 6 leader, David Mason. And he ends up giving us a little bit of backstory as to what is actually going on here. Russia has been attacking the SEAL Team 6 base for about a week now, hence why he tried to get in contact with other people via the radio and via the transmissions. Now, Russia, as it turns out, was behind all of the nuclear attacks to begin with, plunging the world into darkness and creating this nuclear winter. And after the nukes went off, they started sending troops out to go and lock people in and destroy the bunkers that are hidden around America and seemingly the rest of the world as well. So the only thing we can do as soldiers is try to stop Russia and specifically go after the root of it and somehow making their way to Russia. But David Mason asks for one thing. He has a family. He wants to see if his family is alive in somewhere that is oddly very close to Russia, specifically Fairbanks, Alaska. Now, when they get to Fairbanks, Alaska, it's not seemingly hit by a nuke or anything of the sort. It is actually just kind of a ghost town, and eventually they end up making their way to the kind of cabin that was owned by Alex Mason and then David Mason and his family moving forward. And once again, it is completely abandoned. Even on the inside, you can see the children's toys, the family area where they grew up, but no one is there, no one to be seen. So David can only assume that his family is dead. So seemingly pretty stoic, but at the same time angry, David Mason wants to go after Russia to figure out what happened and to get to the bottom of this. So David walks into the backyard and opens up a garage in the backyard, which has a boat, very small, but just big enough for him and Captain Price and Ghost to get across the Bering Strait. But underneath said boat, he opens up a room which is filled with tons and tons of weaponry. So the crew loads up and gets the boat out to the Bering Strait and starts to make their way across the way to Russia. But as they do, they start to be attacked and swarmed by Russian boats. But of course, this is David Mason and Ghost. So you fight your way across the Bering Strait and eventually land upon the shores of Russia. But things are weird when they get to Russia. Like, yeah, there were nukes that clearly went off there. There's clearly been explosions, but there's no bodies. It was like the city was a ghost town before the nukes even went off. And even stranger, there's no one out of many bunkers. There's no one there whatsoever, unlike in the United States. So they hunt around Moscow for quite some time until off into the distance they see a helicopter taking off, But it's not just like from a base or anything. They see some doors open, and from underground out comes a helicopter, the same sort of helicopter that they saw back when they came out of the bunker in New York. So after doing some searching, they end up finding out that not just Moscow, but all of Russia, before the nukes went off, moved to not just an underground bunker, but an entire underground city that was pre-made for all of Russia. Before Makarov launched the nukes and set off the world into a nuclear winter, they prepared, and all of Russia was still alive. But as you go through this underground town, you find out that the Russian people don't hate you. In fact, they're intrigued by seeing Americans and British people in Russia. They just treat this as though the way that the country should be. However, the military is being run by Vladimir Makarov. He is the one sending troops to these other bunkers to destroy all of the other countries. Meanwhile, the civilians don't know anything of it. So once again, we are sent in to track down and stop Vladimir Makarov, because once he is stopped, we can then go to the various places around the world, let people out of the nuclear bunkers, and try to rebuild. So they end up tracking down Vladimir Makarov to a giant silo inside the underground city, assumably another nuclear silo. And at the end of the game, a scrap happens between Captain Price and Vladimir Makarov. But unlike the original Modern Warfare 3, where Vladimir Makarov falls and gets caught hanging, this time instead, it is Captain Price that gets caught hanging. And in turn, Vladimir Makarov falls to the bottom of the missile silo, both of them being dead. Yes, unlike other Call of Duty games, the main character is actually going to die in this one. And in this mission, you play as David Mason, and you actually witness the entire thing happen, and you have a fall for yourself. And everything slowly fades to black. And of course, the credits start to play. But at the very end of the credits, there is not an ending cinematic or anything like that. There is just one sound that is made, just one sound alone, and it is this. And there it is. That is my story. That is Call of Duty Aftermath. And two things. Number one, do you know what that sound is from? And number two, do you know what it would mean for the story that I just wrote? How is that kind of a twist ending, and what would it mean for the rest of the Call of Duty story moving forward? I won't give it away, and maybe if this video does well, I will make a future video explaining that, but I wanted to leave a little bit of mystery for you guys. Now, the reason why I think this would make for a cool Call of Duty game is, first of all, it gives you a ton of amazing situations that are still grounded in reality, but completely unrealistic, like a completely disheveled United States of America, an underground Russia. I think could make for really, really cool multiplayer maps, and not to mention factions like having scavengers in the game to have as a faction for multiplayer and create a theme, things like that. I think it would be really cool and not like anything we saw in a Call of Duty before. So let me know what you think of my idea. I know I went a little bit overboard with it. Thankfully with AI, I can make some of the scenes in here. I know some of them looked pretty ridiculous, but anyway, if you enjoy this type of video, maybe want to see something like this in the future, hit the like button, subscribe, turn notifications on, and until next time, peace.